My child, so beautiful to behold. How do you feel? We found you within the Daily Examine, failing, evil, void in your heart. But Ballas, he saw a lost child in need of a father. As you recovered, he noticed me less and less. What good was I to him if you weren't sick?
Hey all, Siege here, and today it's time to discuss perhaps the most divisive and equally complex character we've been given in game, at least up to this point. Ballas, the Executor of the Seven, the Progenitor of Narmer, the Warden of Kalervo, the Bane of Orden Karis, the lover and, incidentally, final voice condemning Margulis to death, and, of course, the creator of our very own Frames of War. There may be no single individual in Warframe so thoroughly entwined in the Tenno's existence and continued dominance without having a direct relationship, and more importantly, a positive one with them. But, make no mistake, the Tenno are nowhere near as effective and in many cases may not have survived quite a few of their given scenarios without his help, as inadvertent or unintended as it may have been. Or was it? For most, what we see as his treatment of the Lotus, and implied involvement in the death of Margulis, is where most derive their understanding of the former Orc and Executor. And while this is a monumental aspect of who he is, I really do believe many are missing the grander story behind Ballas. In this video, we're going to attempt to do something most would not. We will attempt to understand his thought process, his purpose, the driving force behind the types of extremes he's guilty of, and why he is so terrifying, succeeding in ways the rest of the Orc and as an empire could not. And while he may be many things, one thing that cannot be argued is, without him, there is no Warframe. Now, understand Ballas is by far the most hated of any character within the Warframe universe, with good reason. It is a title that's not unwarranted in any way. This is incontrovertible. However, his actions, behaviors, and motivations are a far more gray area than I'm guessing the vast majority are willing to admit. And what might be the scariest aspect of what he's done is, I'd be willing to bet an uncomfortably large majority of individuals put in the same situation he was, being forced to put the person they love to death with the same access to power, influence, and in the end, total retribution against those that in fact forced him to do it. Well, while morality would be the shield most would use to describe why they wouldn't, I think under the same circumstances, far, far too many would jump at the chance, especially while still wrapped up in the emotions of all of it. I merely wonder who'd be willing to actually admit such a thing. But in the spirit of our age's love of exploiting tragic villains, I'm merely arguing that the singular action of having to order his lover to death may have been a catalyst rather than being purely indicative of who he always was. Unfortunately, at the moment, much of his confirmed existence before the incident with Margulis is shrouded. And in examining the little slices of actual dialogue we've been privy to hear through different quests, what's always interested me within these broken pieces of himself and Margulis is the softness in his voice when actually speaking to her.
What they need, Margulis, is to be destroyed. They're devils from that hell, not human anymore.
No, Ballas, no more destruction. We could heal them. Maybe they're meant to save us.
How can you defend these devils, Margulis, after what they've done to you?
Love looks not with the eyes, but with the mind. They won't hurt anyone. I just need more time.
It doesn't possess the same confident disdain and inner rage the Ballas we would come to know identifies himself with. And it makes me wonder what their relationship was like before all of this. Given her in-game behavior, it would seem Margulis was overly kind, highly intelligent, and a generally decent person.
My bags are packed. I'm all set to leave. I can't believe I'll be working with one of my childhood heroes, Archimedean Margulis. On comms, she said she needed the best infestation biologist there was. I think my knees almost gave out.
And I wonder if someone like that would actually be with someone as ruthless as the persona we've come to understand Ballas is. Uncaring. Torturous, even. And it makes me really question if Ballas wasn't just, at one point at least, a brilliant scientist who perhaps wasn't the monster we've come to know, rather just another company man attempting to climb the ladder, all the while being burdened with the obvious fear of what might occur should he not be in agreement with the rest of the Seven. One would have to assume that he was not always one of these distinguished members, so like any corporation, every now and then you gotta do something that doesn't necessarily agree with your principles. Basically, you have to forget you have any. Most who have been there understand this and have seen others put to that test. Results? Well, they vary, wouldn't you agree? Regardless, I think it needs to be said that although in theory the right move would have been to stand up to the Orcan and defy their orders for her execution, as she herself inferred.
Do something. Get me out of here.
You know I can't.
Can't or won't.
I told you not to speak out. If you recant, maybe...
You lied to me, Ballas. You're no different than the rest of them.
Margulis, please forgive me.
I question what that would have actually accomplished. Do any of you watching really believe that by resisting with some great speech, telling the other six how wrong they were about this decision, making these executors look bad, or try to impress the point that they had made a terrible mistake by ordering her death, one worth immediately reconsidering, would have moved them to do so? Or do you believe it's more likely Ballas would have been disciplined in some way, perhaps even removed from the immediate chambers, replaced, maybe even put to death? Is that really so hard to consider? Can you imagine the sheer number of Orcan chomping at the bit to replace one of these positions? This small group, some of which we've already been offered brief looks into regarding their own, let's say, deficiencies.
How dare you fear? What do you imagine you have to lose? You citizens are born to die. Such is your lot. But even such a death as yours may be meaningful if it serves us.
Tuval, being chief among them, in many ways rule the entire solar system and had every intention of ruling Tau. Within the New War, we even come to realize that Pergasa, the sentient mother that would have served the Orcan in the beginning, while functioning largely as a method to consume and repurpose lost or broken derelicts in space, was actually originally created for one purpose: to eat the sun. The Orcan elite had planned a final send-off to their former home once Tau had been functioning to their liking. Those that still lived there, good luck. This was, of course, the job Ballas was essentially intending to finish with the New War. Well, when he learned the Tenno had returned, that is. Having had the curse of working in corporate America myself, I can't even fathom the level of dirty politics that would exist amongst a people so bereft of caring about anything but themselves, occurring in late-night meetings, back-channel connections, and passive-aggressive interactions. Not to mention getting Ballas or any of the Seven replaced would be quite the lucrative procedure for quite a few involved. Of course, that last part, speculation, but what isn't, unfortunately, is that at some point, he would in fact become what many would consider consumed with the idea of bringing the Orcan Empire to its knees, absolutely unhinging any restraints he had previously held regarding morality, along with any decency he had left, sharing the same fate. Sounding all too familiar to one Albert Dentrati.
how in the alchemy of the soul, even repentance must necessarily be a calculated task. I will repair what I have broken, no more, no less. The scales must balance, and in such a monstrous penitence as this, I shall take no heed of the dust that may fall upon them on either side, the dust of petty lives. The builders of old tempered their mortar with blood to appease the most ancient of land spirits. We should have been so wise, yet it is not too late to learn.
Dehumanizing anyone he deemed a threat to the point that any actions, if serving his greater good, were more than justified. The art of war, as it were. But what most don't understand is his dissent was compounded by the idea of betrayal that cut far deeper than the Orcan ever could. Because Ballas was in love with Margulis deeply. I've seen reports that he treated her in an abusive manner, but at least within the actual lore, I haven't been able to find any proof of that present prior to the incident where she decided to speak out against the executors, a crime deemed worthy of death by the legions they lived by. The Lotus? Now that's a much different story, and one we'll see truly broke him in the end. But his tributes to Margulis in a myriad of warframes, his own verbal sworn love in countless situations, and finally his eventual attempt at recreating her, they too tell a story. One of a person he may have been, at least to her, if nothing else. Fortunately, no matter what he may or may not have been, we all know what he came to be. He's a murdering bastard. You all know that. And there are consequences to breaking the heart of a murdering bastard. The Orcan, the Sentients, I'd even argue Ortis, Umbra, Calervo, Jade, the Stalker, and especially the Tenno experienced them. Because what we need to understand is all of these things happened after Margulis had been put to death. We know this because we know she was vehemently against transference being used with the children and the warframes, the sole reason she was tried in the first place. Her apostasy being that she went against what they believed to be their divine will as Orcan. She did not look at the children as weapons, and for his part, based on what he says, neither did Ballas.
It's about the other rejects we consigned to Lua a few years ago. They're calling it transference. I know we are desperate, Executor, but these aren't Dak soldiers. These are golems possessed by devil minds.
And with what this singular incident would incite within him, and the righteous infliction of retribution it produced, I find myself personally unable to believe he willingly sentenced her to death. Rather, I see it as him really having no way out at that moment. Afterwards? Well, the price they would all pay for their transgressions would be all. The collapse that we've been told about so many times in game was born of what would follow. One of the most elaborate and painfully patient coups that anyone would ever have to endure. What we wake up to and awaken, a new Tenno's first few warframe, is essentially the fruits of his plan. Whether or not he intended it, there's no order left here, with the operators coming to find the rest of Sol isn't very different. Everything we see, all of it, it all occurred because Ballas loved Margulis. Think about it. He had everything he already wanted, even before defecting. There would most likely be no shortage of women wanting to take her place, and he was already in a place of infinite wealth and power to begin with. Given his penetrating mind, would it not have been just easier to manipulate his way to the lead seat of the Seven versus literally burning it all down? Vengeance like this doesn't come from someone who doesn't love deeply and wasn't hurt to an unfathomable degree. But we'll get more into that a bit later, because while it's true, we will come to find that while the Lotus chose the death over being with him, allegedly at least, I'm not necessarily sure that's what Margulis was doing. And I feel this distinction is one the game tries to even convey.
Forgive me.
For what? I am not who you think I am.
But of course you are. Imprisoned, just as she was.
Margulis wasn't choosing death over Ballas. She was choosing death over having to work with the children and knowingly turn them into weapons for the Orokin.
My daughters, my sons, I want you to know my last thoughts are of you.
And I believe her sacrifice largely inspired both his defection from the Orokin and their downfall as a product. Given their place in the universe at that point, would you not consider it a miracle for anyone to be able to overthrow them with their golden grip on everything at that point? How could bringing down such a machine even be possible? Well, Ballas would have intrinsically understood that he did not have the physical prowess to openly confront the Orokin, and thus he would need to devise a plan. The plan would be simple, but would require volunteers, and unfortunately when dealing with espionage, he couldn't necessarily attempt to figure out who would serve his goals willingly. So, in many cases, he decided to take who he needed and make them more agreeable by using his incredibly adept intelligence. He would take the demons of the Zariman. He would give them the weapons the Orokin so desperately needed for the sentient war, one we may come to find was influenced by Ballas himself. Tau offers us a different look at the area. Sentience and Orokin working in harmony, learning from each other, and who sits at the metaphorical head of this area? Ballas, praising the sentience no less. It's too early to understand what's really happening here, and once that has been determined, we will almost certainly analyze how it affects Ballas's greater story, but from what we see, I can't help but wonder if this is a brief glimpse of what he envisioned for the future. Because in the one we exist within, he would use all of these same tools to not create, but instead destroy the entirety of his previous livelihood, both for her and for what he believed might produce a second chance, one that even the great Ballas had not eyes to see, was a dream at best.
I loved you once. You were so like her.
You dreamed of a Margulis you could control, but she chose death over you.
A good dream, perhaps, but nothing more.
You had to have a child. And with an open heart, I gave you this. And my reward? Being left to watch as all your love, my love, poured into the bottomless well of this abominable child.
Have you ever been hurt so deeply, so foundationally, that instead of panic or uncontrolled anger, it's almost as if it becomes a moment of clarity? As if all the things you should have said, all the things you should have done, pour out into a stream of consciousness you only wish certain people were actually there to hear. This is, in my opinion, when one allows themselves, even briefly, to be fully consumed by their anger, their hate, their malice, and in doing so, unites the two halves of our psyche in a very dark purpose. Morality being thrown to the ground due to the belief that others too must hurt like you do. Now, for most, we are able to pull back from the precipice of madness, regain ourselves, and understand these ideas to be wrong. But not everyone comes back. And I believe once she was gone, once he realized he could no longer serve the Orokin, much like the very depiction Nissi gives within Along Came a Spider.
Once upon a time, there was a little girl. An angry little girl, whose life was filled with fury and rage. She hurt and maimed, and was hurt and maimed in return. And along came a spider, who told her that everything in the world always ended in anger. But the spider said he could eat it all up for her. But she turned away and realized she had nothing else to fill her life with. The spider smiled, and he ate her all up.
Her recounting of the journey to her own dark side, I'm reminded of one of the most profound phrases I can think of.
Only a Sith deals in absolutes.
Only a person fully consumed with their hatred, ideals, and beliefs thinks there's no other way but violence, no other way but eradication of all who don't agree. While many times there seem to be nods, I'm going to say here that I don't fully know if Ballas has been chosen by the Indifference as a host. His descent into evil does in many ways mimic that of Rusalka's fall, and I would imagine Margulis' death would have caused him unspeakable pain, triggering equally powerful emotional response. He is as well known to have already engaged in the process of continuity, so his soul, for lack of a better term, has in theory been exposed to the void, maybe many times. He was thought to have been killed, in fact, even by that of Drusus after the collapse, yet reappears within the Origin system, coincidentally, right after we've completed the Chains of Hera, showing up out of nowhere behind our very Tenno, moments before reclaiming the Lotus for himself. Then, of course, we have the Indifference recreating this very path during the Chimera prologue, leading the Tenno straight to a newly amalgamated Ballas. In hindsight, almost assuredly, within his own desires. And, of course, he takes it from there, making a weapon needed in the end for Ballas to literally remove the Tenno and the Lotus from time, for lack of a better term, as well as almost providing him the path to Tau. This act, in the end, even being considered as the catalyst for the Indifference sudden interest in Soul. And I can't help but hear the almost perfect match of something Ballas says in the lead up to the sacrifice.
If you could trade, would you? Surely. But all miracles require sacrifice. For their life. Yours.
With that of a certain Zeraman tablet found in Duviri, where the correct answer offers a slightly different perception of our own deal. These days, he can still be found presiding over Kullervo as a supposed conceptual embodiment of the Warframe's pain, but a void copy of Ballas, nonetheless. Sounding like him, but disappearing much like our own doppelganger. Does this entity possess any or all of the true Ballas' intentions, his intelligence? How much of Kullervo's idea of Ballas is here, and how much has been filled in by the void? A true connection or deal between Ballas and the void are much like the concept of the hidden planet within our solar system. There's all kinds of evidence to suggest its existence, but we just haven't had a definitive smoking gun to point it out yet. My gut tells me, based on both Ballas' history as well as the current narrative unfolding within Warframe, that we will come to find the two have crossed paths and negotiated, if nothing else. But at the moment, all we have are traces alluding to a relationship they may or may not have had. For now. Regarding his plan, almost immediately after her death, we come to find within the crewman Detron imprint that we were in fact witnessing just how hypocritical the regime was that had forced his hand in his love's demise. This passage shows their divine law is a bit of a floating concept. While Margulis' remains still lie on the floor, we see the origins of the sentience, how they came to be in a move that I'm sure will shock no one. The Orcan elite don't always follow the law to the letter themselves, should shunning it potentially satisfy a need. Curious that one would be given such leniency while the other such punishment. And I wonder if that same thought crossed Ballas' mind at that moment as well, or the night before. I'd even argue his suggestion to Margulis to recant was largely a method of placating the Orcan until he could figure a better way out. That's his MO after all. It's what he did for himself, and in hindsight would have most likely been successful in doing so. He couldn't, of course, speak these words for fear of anyone hearing, but with her firm stance on the matter, adamant to defy their desire to use the children in such a way, it really did put him in the bleakest of positions. What to do? What makes it all more heartbreaking is when Margulis herself pleaded with him.
Do something. Get me out of here.
As I interpret this, and for the reasons I stated above, Ballas cannot do anything of meaning here to save her that doesn't include sacrificing himself in the process. And whereas that may be the noble or altruistic option, as stated, their deaths will become nothing more than a memory, most likely deleted from Orcan history. So simple defection wasn't going to be enough. I consider what he says to Umbra as a proof of his breaking point.
Yet you couldn't understand why I'd give my secrets to our enemy. How could I betray my own kind? But you have never had to sacrifice your love for faith. Imagine to live forever with only one memory. Seeing the one you love die.
Really think about what's being said here. That's not mania or rage. It's controlled. He has become fully consumed by his ego. His hate gives him focus, but only on one thing. Anger doesn't necessarily manifest into physical rage, especially for those who are smart enough to understand where their own gifts can utilize such a powerful emotion best. This is what makes Ballas, after Margulis' death, so terrifying. We can say for certain that before this moment, he at least cared for someone a lot. But afterwards, no one. No one but her. And he would have lifetimes with himself bearing a painful, burning memory. And if in the end he doesn't end up having help from the Void, his plan to orchestrate the downfall of those that forced him to not only witness Margulis' death, but be the orator chosen to enact the deed as well, it's almost unbelievable that just by suggestion and manipulation, remember, to our knowledge, Ballas did all of this without having to fire a single shot, that he was able to accomplish so much. And of course, he does have help from the Void in the lead up to the New War, but a connection is loose, as mentioned. In hindsight, look what all he did. And I think what they forced him to do to her, and just a deepening hatred of what it was to be Orcan at that point, to feel a restructuring was necessary. And he would use those who would cross him and his privileged access to resources to make it happen. All the while, living out loud as an Orcan elite, interested only in the glory of the Empire, being exactly what they wanted him to be, maybe even what they made him to be or become, selling the move every day, but no different really than any man taking pleasure in his work, something he often does. Within Ortis' story, we come to find that Ballas was the one presiding over a kind of ceremony for the brutal warrior, once named Orden Karis, who, upon being honored by the Orcan, turned this ceremony into an opportunity to remove them all from existence. Him only realizing the monsters the Golden Lords had turned his brothers and sisters into for their reverence, and while appearing to achieve his goal while expiring in the process, he is met by Ballas here, who forces him to drink the kuva, theoretically preserving his soul, and comes to find himself inextricably tied to us.
Ballas says, "You are Sevalon Ordis. My hating, murderous shards tremble and plummet. I feel cool and bright and happy." Ballas says, "You are the controller, Ordis. And suddenly I have a body. I gasp with new lungs that clean old air. I swallow, and my throat fills with cool, bright water. I look and find myself in a great black ocean. My limbs are made of iron and fire. I take flight among the stars and find I am happy. He says, "This is your operator, who you love." And I see the metal gleam of their armor, the flawless power of their frame. Through the glass, I see a roaring, radiant fire for their heart. He says it must never go out. It was the first time I ever felt love. He says, "This is your sentence, Garrus." And I am confused. Who? Ah, good, he answers. He is testing me. For what? To see if all the right pieces fell from the mirror? What mirror? I try to remember some dream, but it's only smoke.
Newly transformed into our ship Cephalon, meant to take care of the children of the Zariman, to aid them, provide support and comfort, strategic assistance, weapons, and warframe information. Anything they would need. And while it would appear Ortis' current feelings for the operator are genuine, could be argued that at least at one point they were more programmed than anything else. It would beg to question what exactly would happen if Ballas showed up on our orbiter. He sure does seem to have the ability to control others against their will, the Lotus and Umbra most notably. The point here is, while I can't give a definitive timeline and as such a chronological order, I can tell you the stories of Kullervo and Umbra seem to follow a similar path, each of which would come to aid the Tenno in one way or another. But given Ballas' intimate connection to the Warframes themselves, being very much the father of them, he really does put a lot of effort into taking care of the Zariman kids, don't you think? Hellman, another of Ballas' creations, while calling the operator by the same naming structure that Ballas does, clearly does not oppose the Tenno. It just merely sees them for the void beings they are, while others are theorized to have made their own creations.
Our hubris shone like a black star. For our technology, our war machines were your kin. How easily you turned them against us. We were forced to older means. Not circuits, nor light, but flesh and disease. Our horrors passed. Our ravaged outer colonies became gardens. We cultured the infestation, conceiving of a hybrid, transformed, but only just. The Helminth was created, born to yield these new warriors, worthy of battle against you, the great and terrible Hunhow.
Even one like Albert Contrati still attributes the Warframes to Ballas himself. And in the case of Kullervo, being one of those most closely attributed to the eventual Tenno massacre on Pluto, one of his 7 crimes, who Ballas himself judged guilty, and yet it's amazing to me that they both had the same exact plan, the same goal, providing the same result with the downfall of the Orkan. It's curious, don't you think? Umbra is even told of his eventual fate as a Tenno warsuit. It's odd that it took so long for him to be unleashed, and the events of this happening are odd to begin with. In the end, a product of apostasy, where the operators are desperate for any information regarding their Lotus. You could make the argument Umbra was meant for us. Now bear in mind, what Ballas did to Umbra was brutal, horrific, and excessive in every way imaginable, but any other method would have most likely raised questions on what exactly was happening to one of their prized soldiers, one with information regarding Ballas' defection, no less. By using Umbra in the Warframe program, he could bypass this under the guise that he was taking the Empire's best to serve as the unholy surrogate of the Tenno, a common practice at this point. Taking the Warframe's voice was part of the general protocol anyway, so in theory, it was as good a method of stopping Umbra and at the same time using him for his own purposes with the events at the conclusion of the sacrifice, potentially too being all part of the plan. The only way to make us believe Ballas was in peril, that we might help him, using our desire to see broken things and fix them, exploited in the same way he does with everything else.
This was inevitable.
Yes. Yes. She has foreseen it.
This is his power. Even when you think you're serving yourself, defying him even, there's a really good chance with Ballas, you're in fact helping him, perhaps even doing his work for him. You've seen the pattern by now, yes?
Those devils. What has their great awakening accomplished but the destruction of potential allies? Don't they see? Love must die, as Margulis did when I sent her to the Jade Light. And the Lotus, just some cloud in the sky, just some shape they imagined. Only the sentient is real. Only Natar. So, tell me, devil, do you understand what must be done?
Amazingly enough, there's actually really good reason to believe even the horrific events surrounding Jade, where Ballas, finding out that she and Stalker, then known as Soren, had conceived a child, won't still come to have incredibly significant purpose in the Tenno's greater fight. Orcan warriors were not permitted to procreate without the decree and blessing of the Empire, their purpose needing to be very clear on who it served. And a child would obviously take their focus away from duty, so in punishment, he turned her into a warframe while her child was still in the womb. Soren would eventually go down the same path as a warframe as well, seeming to become confused in exactly who he should be working for and against, a symptom of warframe conversion, shown in multiple iterations within the greater narrative. And in the end, amazingly enough, the Stalker comes to help our plight. First by sparing the Tenno when they were most vulnerable at the reservoir, and again during the New War. You know, for someone who hates the operators in the way he claims, he sure does give them a lot. Not just in toys, but in help too. It's really kind of strange, don't you think? And then don't forget, there is perhaps his greatest instrument, his greatest creation. While not completely substantiated, evidence of the coup against the Orcans seems to infer that at some point after the Sentients had begun making Tau their home, and while in the process of terraforming it for their golden lords, they came to love it and quite simply couldn't bear the idea of the Orcan doing to it what they did and still had yet to do to Sol. Especially given that they of all creatures knew what the endgame of Tau will eventually be. Its stars no more than food for Pergasa. Once, of course, it's been stripped of all its resources over the years. It's possible even Ballas saw what the Orcan elite were planning, and if the teaser for Tau is any indication, planted a seed within the machines that resistance was not only possible, it was necessary. And with that concept in mind, he would contact the sentient Hunhao in secret and offer him the most damning information he could provide. The secret behind the warframes, the only weapon the Orcan possessed that the sentients could not counter. That while the sentients would not be able to contend with the hybridized infested warframes, they may be able to destroy their hearts, the Tenno children, the rejects from the Zariman. Once it was determined they could control the frames, an Orcan victory over the sentients was all but certain. According to Ballas, the only way to fell their overlords would be to destroy the reservoir, render the warframes ineffective due to lack of control, and continue on the path of decimating whatever was left of their society. This would save Tau in theory, or just have it prepped for control from a different warlord. Either way, they would need a way in. So she was made.
So the Golden Wrath came, and after, I was born. A mimic. A spy. Conceived to burrow into nests and swallow the pitch eggs of their war machine, the Tenno. But when I saw the tender faces, I took mercy. Or so we were told.
Made to kill the Tenno, pure and simple. Now here's where things get interesting. There are two accounts by the Lotus on what actually happened. The first is portrayed during the Nata quest.
Nata, Lotus, you cannot hide this past any longer.
There are gaps. I had my mission, and I have completed it. All but the last sequence.
To destroy the Tenno.
The war was over, so I hid them away. In a second dream, I could not destroy them.
And yet, you were born to. So tell me, what made you stop to reject your nature?
All missions to the Origin system required a sacrifice. Me and my kind become barren when crossing the gap. It is the one flaw we never overcame.
Nata wanted children of her own.
Nata was the daughter, until I destroyed her. Now, I am the Lotus. I am the mother.
However, she contradicts this in the lead up to the Robololist fight.
But in truth, we were both imprisoned in Lua's belly. My light remade by the creators. I became a memory, a ghost. Reprogrammed to destroy my family, my people, my history.
So was it her decision to grant mercy and then guidance to the Tenno because she could not bear to kill them? Or was she directed to stay her hand? To instead become the Lotus, defy her family, and take the Tenno children as her own instead, imprisoning herself in Lua with them in the process? That is still not completely understood.
We crossed the gap, wounds and ruin to bring an end to this. We severed worlds. Let them destroy me. Why is the sequence not complete?
Hunhao clearly believed she would fulfill their plan, and yet the sheer amount of work as well as manipulation Ballas had been engaged in, creating and improving upon his designs, meant for only one group of individuals. The scheming required to make the very things he despised into, for lack of a better term, the perfect fighting force to help him achieve his goals. His creation of both Ortis and Umbra for a Tenno that, especially in the case of Umbra, wouldn't even be overly relevant until after the collapse had even occurred. Well, I'd personally lean towards the latter.
I remember my old self dissolving beneath your fingers, shaping me, directing me. Lua.
I wonder what a world with so many unchecked warframes would even be like without the operators to keep them at bay. While that last point may not be incredibly relevant, it's just another bit of anecdotal evidence, somewhat undermining the plan Ballas had so painstakingly crafted and maintained. Because his final goal was to live in Tau with the Lotus. But if taken from the 1,000-foot view, I believe the argument can be made that merely by not forcing the Lotus, something he has shown to have the power to do multiple times,
When the Lotus reaches him, he will make her his puppet.
to kill the Tenno, he was in agreement, at least with her, to spare the children at the precipice of the sentient's victory. And in the highly debated era scene, portraying the Lotus and her black-eyed Tenno, well, under this thinking, rather than the man on the wall somehow causing the Lotus's normally blue light on her helmet to shine a bright red, he was merely a bystander, and it was instead Ballas who was controlling her. This anomaly resembling the transference bolt interaction with Umbra, appearing to be in fact leading a cadre of Tenno, perhaps even reinforced by the loss of connection the Tenno experience when the Lotus finally removes the helmet in apostasy. Does this concept strengthen the idea of a union between the Indifference and Ballas? Well, it sure doesn't hurt. But what's perhaps more important to consider is the helmet acts as essentially the fulcrum for quite a few different events afterwards. So did she take it off for us? Or did he force her to remove it and leave it there for us, knowing the Tenno would pick it up because of the sentimental value it had? With everything I've seen so far, it's hard not to at least feel his hand guiding this action, and I personally believe all of this was done to recreate the world she wanted to live in. I don't think it was out of love for the children or even the Lotus, but rather because that's what Margulis would have wanted. He even went as far as to make a replica of her, one somehow possessing her actual physical, emotional, and psychological traits. I'm not sure how Margulis is intertwined into this entity we know as the Lotus, but the New War and Lotus Eaters confirm that a part of her, be it in mind, body, or soul, maybe even three all at once, reside within our space bomb. Along with, of course, the experiences of Nata and their fusion. The Lotus, a kind of amalgamation of both of those two. The first, as we know it, at least under that understanding. And what's amazing is it's this act that in the end sealed his fate. But more importantly, truly drove him to the chaotic state we see during the New War.
Yes, let's discuss what I did. I, who have endured your torture of me, your lies, your betrayals without complaint. All for you. And this is my reward.
Because after the carnage, she, the Lotus, was meant to love him, to serve him, to join him. Those two rulers of Tau, destroying the soul system and what was left of humanity with it. Remember, this isn't Margulis anymore, but his creation. And unfortunately, what he came to learn is, just like Margulis, the Lotus held, in the end, ultimate allegiance towards the Tenno. And I believe this second refusal, this second betrayal, this supposed perfect stand-in, meant to look and even act exactly like Margulis, would take on the one trait he couldn't change in the original, her love of the children. And the reason I feel we see a much darker, angrier Ballas than ever before was because this copy, meant to remove the flaws his former love possessed, instead loved them over him. He says these exact words to her at the very end. But he understood that even after reclaiming her, revealing her lost history to her, reuniting her with her true family, and offering her the universe, she chose them, providing the Tenno with subtle clues and hints of her secret desire to be rescued. And that's when the crack was fully exposed. No longer did he desire her companionship. No longer did he need her. Why? Because she had to want to be with him, and the Lotus clearly did not. Did you ever hear the phrase, "There's no arguing a way out of being dumped"? Well, having personally felt that sting, in hindsight, of course, everyone believes they can win back someone who's left them, but I think that most will agree, if the person has no desire to return, there aren't words made that will keep them together. But we typically only learn that years after the fact. The futility of it all. I think Ballas finally came to terms with that fact. He lost her. In his mind, something that would have to be a sacrifice necessary to finally fulfill the dream of making it to shores forlorn.
My people, today we begin a great ascension. For as long as I have lived, a chain has dragged behind me, keeping Tau always beyond grasp. We made our sacrifices, but always with one foot lingering on the shore. Never willing to leave it all behind. Never willing to burn the boats and commit completely to that opposite shore. That is why these worlds must die.
He couldn't have her, so he would take what he could get. Sometimes life's like that. The Orcan were gone, the Tenno gone. No one at this point could challenge him any longer. And by using the populace, all fitted with Narmer veils, to continue to perpetuate the world he wanted people to see, he was their savior. The Tenno were nothing more than what he claimed. Devils from that other hell, and that the Sol system was thriving without them. And I never really thought about the minutiae of the plan, but given what ended up occurring, especially in how quickly he seemed to be able to capture, change the appearance of, and reprogram, first the sentient supposed secret weapon and era, but then in years to come, the entirety of the sentient race, with the dumbfounded responsive era at the sight of his own sister reshaped and now opposing him, probably being the most shocking proof. It warrants asking if this too was always just part of Ballas's plan. Part of the plan that Hun Hao was obviously not made aware of. I imagine in the eyes of the former executor, this bit of information was only being granted on a need-to-know basis, and in this case, Hun Hao didn't need to know. And at this point, after believing the Tenno to finally be gone out of his life, he tries to rule the Sol system. His intentions are purely for the galaxy to prosper under his new Narmer faction. But more importantly to him, the Lotus and the Tenno were supposed to have been trapped within their own recursive timelines. Gone out of his life. And if he couldn't have her, at least, no one would. And you can see this when he realizes they have returned. Had she returned on her own, maybe there was still a chance to have her rule by his side, but with the Tenno there, it was impossible.
Tenno! Even hell was not hot enough to split them.
What does it matter? You have won. Narmer spreads across the system. Monuments rise to your glory. All who live, bios and not, kneel before you.
But not them!
Amazingly enough, neither were really strong enough to defeat him in this fight. He had to lay down his power for them to win. And he did. He even offers the same thing to her, just as she reaches his pulpit before the fight.
Kneel! Kneel, and I will spare these worlds. Beg, and I will make you complete again.
I had something different in mind.
I loved you once. You were so like her.
He'll save them all. Every entity in Sol, including the Tenno. She only needs to be the Margulis he wants. But even he knows this is futile before he asks. The ensuing battle really isn't much of one, as stated, as our warframes are almost useless and it feels more like he's letting us damage him in the battle versus us really taking it to him. Call it bad boss design, but to me, this fight is more procedure than anything else, giving him enough time to explain to us his side of things. Which brings us to what might have been his desired trip to Tau. Within the Devil's Triad sister trailers, we are introduced to Uriel, a supposed devil frame. But what's interesting here is the second half reveals him to be Orokin, which puts an entirely new spin on what proto-frames still may exist out in the real world. Add to that, his armor very closely resembles that which the Tenno sport in Tau. And there's even art found that appears to show Uriel leading the charge on the very battlefield introduced in the old piece. He may have played a very significant role here, and with Ballas having such a seemingly major influence in the area, along with Entrati specifically using his formula to create proto-frames, and now an Orokin showing up as one, was this bestowed upon Uriel as a punishment or a gift? Perhaps a bit of both, depending on whether or not Ballas can control Uriel, as he seems to be able to do with other warframes. And even though Ballas is supposedly dead, hard not to believe that we aren't going to see him a lot in the near future, be it in passages describing memories or even in the flesh. Would it really surprise anyone to believe that somehow he's still not dead, that he's been plotting. We've already once believed him to be long gone, only to reappear. I wouldn't count out a second coming, that's all I'm saying. In the end, because the vast majority of what we know Ballas is after the tragedy of Margulis' death, I don't think people really consider what having to do that to a person you love would change in you. What makes Ballas so terrifying within the story is the effect having some foundational pillars of his own personality crumble under such extreme circumstances is having on the greater universe. Ballas to me is an extremely tragic villain, someone too intelligent, too calculating, and, after the Jade Light, too consumed with loss both of his love and of his former self. This ego death of sorts, living a particular way for so long and having it quickly unravel to somewhere it just can't be fixed, changes a person. It can take the happiest, most fun-loving individual and turn them cold, turn them indifferent to everything else around them. Thin, butter scraped across too much bread. In these situations, you learn to become someone else, someone better, someone new. But sometimes, like in the case of Ballas, well, you take a different path. Scorched earth may not drive the point deep enough. Perhaps scorched solar system is more apt a description here. The problem with becoming consumed with anything is it leaves no room for anything else. The mind becomes specifically one track, and too often the social restraints that are championed on a daily basis, the ones that hold the very fabric of society together, feel discardable because of emotions. We want them to hurt because we hurt. We want them to feel what we feel. Because maybe, just maybe, they won't do it again if they just know. But here's the thing. If you become a monster to match the hate you felt, you've lost the claim of having decency, the claim of the high road, or being better. And depending on what you do, again, like Ballas, you could become much worse. We almost lost everything for the pride of one man, as Era points out at the end. Ballas could not live with the idea of a world where she, even as the Lotus, existed, and not with him. And by offering to spare everyone with just her loyalty, he proved that. But while he may have loved the Lotus like she was Margulis, the fact of the matter is they aren't the same person. And in this, I believe we can identify Ballas' greatest failure. No matter what, the day Margulis died was the end. From that day on, the Orokin died too. They just didn't know it yet. And for every horrible thing he did to the operator, or those the operators are close to, there is a corresponding benefit he's given them. Ortis, our ship Cephalon, literally integrated into the orbiter to take care of our every need. The warframes, an overwhelmingly large list of biosuits meant to, by all rights, protect the Tenno, as their void bodies are amazingly squishy. A helmet to maintain the suits, to keep them in top condition in order to continue to do the aforementioned job, conveniently located right within the ship, no less. If you've ever seen one of the Prime trailers, you can immediately recognize the joy he gets from introducing a new warframe. And given what we see in Tau, it could even be argued he's given the Tenno a veritable seat at the table, if you will. This operator is walking out within Orokin halls, not trapped within a pod, using the warframes as living surrogates. This whole place doesn't match up at all with what we've been told of the Tenno's history, how they had to live. And under this mindset, I find myself asking the question, when Teshin revealed this piece of information to us in the War Within.
I warned you. Now you're trapped inside this place with the queens burrowing in. Now I am forced to undo what Margulis did, to open the gates and make you suffer. Margulis lied to you, a lie of omission. She did not cure the Zeraman children. She erased them. My only hope is that truth still lingers inside you, buried within your mind. The power and the misery of the void.
What was he really saying here? I must say, I don't feel we've seen the last of our dear Ballas, friends. So when he reappears again, I will continue the story I've presented here today. But what I wanted to try to convey here is perception is everything. And without needed context, well, there may be more to the story of Ballas, Margulis, Natah, the Lotus, and us before it's all said and done. And don't be surprised if not everything ends up being Ballas's fault. Without condoning or condemning his actions, what I can say is I at least understand. It doesn't absolve him of any of his crimes, and he deserved the end he got. The universe is a better place without him, make no mistake. But I can't help but believe his end, it was the one he really wanted.
Very well. I give you my death, and yours as well. The unstoppable annihilation of every single last thing. Pleased? Satisfied? Are you now full up with death? My vision was only ever comprehensible to myself. My ambition beyond the grasp of people. Thus, I have always been alone. Your death changes nothing. People warned me against you, you know, early on, before the Jade Light. I should have listened.
Without her, all we see is a lost, broken man, desperately trying to recreate the world he already had and failing on every count. If what we see at the end of the New War does turn out to be the last part of his story, if nothing else, perhaps it finally provided him peace. But keep an eye out for doppelgangers. There's too much unchecked emotionality here to believe, after watching and even helping him in his ascent in armor, that the Void wouldn't consider him unique enough to take an interest in. With that being said, I hope you enjoyed this first real look into Ballas, what he was, and it got you into thinking on what he still may become. We've already seen him as a sentient, and with all the different realities or possibilities as they're being referred to in game, could we see a proto-frame Ballas yet emerge? Before the Devil's Triad, I wouldn't have thought it was possible, but now?
Oh, thanks. All off.
At any rate, I hope you all have a wonderful day today, a wonderful rest of your week, and I'll talk at you all in the next one. Take care, everybody. Bye.